You're nothing without me, Daniel. Love doesn't pay bills, and I won't waste my life being poor with you. You sold your only car for me, but Andrew can give me the life I deserve. You'll never be enough for me, Daniel. Andrew can give me the world, and you can't even keep the lights on. Goodbye, Daniel. I need a man who can actually provide. Daniel, you'll always be a good man, but good men stay broke. Those were Clara's final words before walking into Andrew's arms, leaving behind the man who sacrificed everything to save her life. What she didn't know was that Daniel, dismissed as poor, broken, and powerless, was already building a silent empire, a financial fortress designed not to win her back, but to destroy Andrew completely, and leave Clara begging at the feet of the man she betrayed. Viewers, have you ever given someone everything, only to be discarded like nothing? What's sweeter, proving them wrong, or watching them beg? He sold his only car, the last thing he had left, to pay for her life-saving surgery. She held his hand in that hospital bed and whispered, "You're the only one I can count on." But the moment she recovered, she walked out, leaving him for being too poor, never realizing he was the silent owner of the entire car dealership she thought he merely worked at. Why would a woman abandon the very man who saved her life? How could she trade love for an illusion of wealth? Who was the man she left him for, and what brutal revenge was waiting when she discovered the truth? What would happen when the poor man she despised revealed he was the millionaire she could never have again? The story of Daniel Whitmore and Clara Reynolds began not with betrayal, but with devotion. Daniel, 32, was known in Houston as the quiet, hard-working car salesman who always smelled faintly of motor oil and coffee. To outsiders, he looked like a man living paycheck to paycheck. What they didn't know was that Daniel wasn't just a salesman, he owned the dealership, inherited after his father's death. His late father had raised him on one principle: the right woman will stand by you when she thinks you have nothing. That's how you'll know her love is real. That belief kept Daniel's ownership a secret. Clara entered his life during a routine checkup. She was a nurse with a radiant smile that could calm even the most restless patient. Born into a middle-class family, Clara had ambition in her bones. She loved Daniel's kindness, but sometimes she whispered to her best friend Megan that she wished he had more drive. Megan often teased her, "Girl, love doesn't pay bills." Clara would laugh, but in her silence lay unease. Then came the night that sealed Daniel's fate. Clara collapsed at work, her body betraying her. The doctors spoke of urgent surgery, the kind that insurance barely covered. $35,000 stood between Clara and her life. Without hesitation, Daniel walked into his garage, pressed his forehead against the hood of his car, the last asset he owned in plain sight, and whispered, "Dad, I hope this proves I've learned what love is worth." Hours later, the car was gone, replaced with a cashier's check that saved Clara's life. When she woke, her fingers brushed his, and she whispered, "You're the only one I can count on." For a heartbeat, Daniel believed those words. Yet when Clara's eyes darted to the empty space where his car once was, her lips trembled. "You sold it?" Daniel nodded. "It was the fastest way." Clara turned her head to the window. "That was your only car, Daniel." Her tone wasn't gratitude, it was disappointment. Daniel swallowed the ache rising in his throat, but the fissure had formed. That night, as she rested, Megan's words echoed in Clara's ear, "Don't you want a man who can give you more than just one car?" She didn't answer, but her silence was already a betrayal waiting to bloom. And Daniel, hearing her whisper once to herself, "I can't live like this forever," froze at the doorway. He didn't confront her. He simply stood there, silent, gripping the frame until his knuckles turned white. That silence wasn't weakness. It was the start of something darker, something Clara would regret. Daniel returned home late that evening, his shirt damp from the Houston rain, the faint smell of gasoline and dust clinging to him. The bus ride had taken longer than expected, and he hated the way Clara's eyes flickered with quiet judgment each time he walked in without his car. She was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her polished nails glinting under the lamp. "You're late again," she said flatly. "The buses don't run on my schedule," he answered with a tired smile. He reached for her hand, but she slipped it away casually. That small gesture stabbed deeper than any words. Daniel had once thought her warmth could melt stone, but lately, all he felt was ice. In the early days, Clara had adored his simplicity. She told friends, "He's dependable. He's real." Daniel remembered their first picnic in the park, how she laughed when he pulled out sandwiches wrapped in wax paper instead of restaurant takeout. "You're not trying to impress me, you're just you," she had said, resting her head on his chest. But those words belonged to another time. Now, Clara's eyes darted toward her friend Megan's Instagram posts, lavish dinners, men in sharp suits, diamond watches catching the light. And every time she compared, Daniel fell shorter in her heart. "Daniel," Clara said carefully, as though testing him. "Do you ever think about, more? About a bigger future?" He studied her face. "I think about us. That's more than enough for me." She sighed, leaning back. "Love doesn't pay bills." The words pierced him, echoing the exact line Megan had once whispered into Clara's ear. Daniel looked at her but didn't answer. Silence was his weapon, for now. The next night, as Clara slept, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, flipping through old photos of his father. The dealership loomed in the background of every memory, rows of gleaming cars, his father's proud arms slung around his shoulder. "Never flaunt wealth," his father used to say. "It blinds people. Hide it, and you'll see who they truly are." Daniel had taken that advice literally, working the dealership floor like an ordinary employee, letting everyone assume ownership belonged to someone else. It was his shield, his test, his secret. But now that secret was costing him Clara. His phone buzzed, lighting up with a message he wasn't supposed to see. Clara had forgotten to mute notifications. The text was from Megan. "He'll never be enough, Clara. You need a man who can take you places." Clara's reply followed seconds later, "I know. Sometimes I wonder if I made the wrong choice." Daniel's hands tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. He didn't wake her. He didn't shout. Instead, he placed the phone back gently on the nightstand and lay awake in silence, staring at the ceiling. But as dawn broke, one thought hardened inside him: if she thinks I'm poor, let her believe it, until it destroys her. The evening began with champagne and laughter, but by midnight Clara's mascara was streaked from tears. Andrew's voice had cut through the penthouse like a whip. "Do you know how much you embarrassed me tonight?" His glass shattered against the wall, the sound making her flinch. Clara tried to defend herself. "Andrew, it was just a question. I asked about your deal." "You don't question me in front of my partners," he roared, his hands slamming the marble counter. "Do you understand what reputation means in my world?" Her heart pounded. She remembered Daniel, gentle hands, quiet voice, a man who sold his car just to save her life. Yet here she was, diamonds around her neck but fear in her chest. She whispered, "I just wanted to understand you better." Andrew's eyes narrowed. "Your job isn't to understand me. Your job is to look good on my arm." The words sank into her bones. She stared at her reflection in the window, beautiful, dressed in silk, but hollow. A prize, not a partner. For the first time, regret gnawed at her, sharp, relentless. Meanwhile, Daniel moved like a shadow in the city. His first strike wasn't dramatic, but it was surgical. The luxury condo deal Andrew had bragged about for weeks suddenly collapsed. The bank withdrew funding after discovering inconsistencies in paperwork. But those inconsistencies hadn't appeared by accident. Daniel had contacts, quiet leverage inherited from his father's old business alliances. A whisper here, a missing document there, and Andrew's empire cracked. The next morning, Andrew stormed into his office, his fury boiling. Clara followed behind, silent, her eyes darting nervously at the rage in his every step. "Someone's sabotaging me," Andrew muttered, slamming his fist on the desk. "Deals don't just fall apart like this." Clara's phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. She hadn't heard from him in weeks. Just 6 words, "Enjoy your future, Clara." Tick. Tock. Her breath caught. She quickly shoved the phone back in her purse, terrified Andrew might see. That night, Andrew's temper grew darker. He poured himself another drink, muttering curses. "If I find out who's doing this," his eyes flashed toward Clara. "You didn't talk to him, did you?" Her voice shook. "No, I haven't." "Good. Because if you did," he didn't finish the sentence. "He didn't need to." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara lay awake in bed, trembling. She thought about Daniel's text, the way it felt less like a threat and more like a clock winding down. Tick. Tock. The sound echoed in her ears, louder than Andrew's snores beside her. Across town, Daniel sat in his office, the city lights painting shadows across his face. His silence was gone now, replaced with a cold, calculated patience. His first move had landed. And it was only the beginning. The next few weeks were a slow suffocation for Andrew. Meetings that once ended with firm handshakes and promises of millions now ended with excuses, cancelled calls, and veiled warnings. A business partner from Dubai stopped returning messages. A European investor pulled out of a luxury hotel project without explanation. Andrew's pride made him rage, but his paranoia made him dangerous. At breakfast, Clara noticed how his hands shook slightly when he poured his coffee. He caught her looking and snapped, "What?" "Nothing," she said quickly, lowering her eyes. She thought back to Daniel, how steady his hands had been even when he was nervous, how calm he was when she was sick. She remembered one afternoon, months ago, when Daniel had quietly slipped into her hospital room after work. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes tired, but he had sat by her bed for hours, telling her stories to distract her from the pain. He didn't have money then, but he had devotion. And devotion, she was beginning to realize, was something Andrew could never buy. Across town, Daniel sat with a banker in a quiet office overlooking the skyline. "You're sure you want to go this route?" the banker asked, leaning in. Daniel's expression didn't flinch. "Pull the credit line. Freeze his liquidity. Don't let a single dollar move without scrutiny." The banker hesitated, then nodded. Daniel slipped him a folder, documentation, signatures, quiet leverage. These weren't the tools of a poor man. These were the weapons of someone who had built an empire beneath a mask of humility. By afternoon, Andrew's accounts were locked tighter than prison doors. His employees whispered in hallways, noticing late paychecks, nervous investors, and rumors of insolvency. That night, Clara returned from shopping to find Andrew hunched over his desk, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and tense. "Listen to me, I don't care what paperwork you think you have. Release my funds or I'll—" He froze when he noticed her in the doorway. He ended the call abruptly. "What are you staring at?" She set her shopping bags down. "Andrew, is everything all right?" He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Just business politics." But she wasn't convinced. Something in his tone rattled her. She sat on the edge of the couch, fingers fidgeting. "You know, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed with Daniel." The words were out before she could stop them. Andrew's glass paused halfway to his lips. "Don't mention him again," he said coldly. Her breath caught. But a spark of rebellion flickered inside her. For weeks she'd felt the walls closing in, Andrew's rage tightening around her like chains. Now she began to wonder if the collapse of his empire wasn't coincidence. She remembered Daniel's text, tick. Tock. Her pulse quickened. Could it be him? Andrew muttered something under his breath and stormed into his office, slamming the door behind him. Clara sat in silence, staring at the flickering city lights outside the window. The thought terrified her, but it also made her heart race with a strange, guilty hope. Daniel might not be gone. Daniel might be pulling the strings. And if he was, she realized with a shiver. Andrew had no idea the storm that was coming. The gala was Andrew's stage, his chance to prove he was still untouchable. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, a sea of tuxedos and gowns, whispers of mergers and fortunes. Clara wore a gown of emerald silk, dazzling enough to draw stares, but her smile felt like porcelain ready to crack. Andrew strutted through the crowd, glass of champagne in hand, laughing louder than usual, bragging harder than ever. Partnership with the Hanover Group is sealed, he boasted to a circle of investors. We're about to expand into 3 new markets. Nothing can stop us. His laughter rang hollow, but no one dared challenge him. Not yet. The announcer's voice cut through the music. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we welcome a distinguished guest, Mr. Daniel Hart. Clara's heart stopped. She turned slowly toward the entrance, and there he was, tall, composed, a black tailored suit that fit like armor. His expression was unreadable, but his presence commanded the room in a way Andrew never could. Investors who had been avoiding Andrew lit up at Daniel's arrival, rushing to shake his hand. Andrew's smirk faltered. What the hell is he doing here? He muttered under his breath. Clara couldn't speak. Daniel's voice carried across the ballroom, calm and deliberate. I apologize for my late arrival. Business has been demanding. His gaze flicked briefly toward Clara, just enough for her knees to weaken, then back to the crowd. But it's good to see so many familiar faces. Hanover, Blackwood, Crestfield, always a pleasure. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Those were the very investors Andrew had claimed as his own. A man from Hanover shook Daniel's hand warmly. We were just discussing your dealership expansion in Europe. Brilliant move. Clara's jaw dropped. Dealership expansion. Daniel's. She felt dizzy. Her mind spun back to moments she had dismissed as coincidences. The way Daniel always knew which investor dinners Andrew was attending, the quiet confidence behind his supposed, humble, job, the text that had felt more like a countdown. Tick. Tock. Andrew forced a laugh. Daniel here used to wash cars at one of my lots. Funny to see you playing dress-up now. The crowd went silent. Daniel's eyes met Andrew's, unflinching. Correction. I own the lots. All of them. And the buildings you lease your offices from. His tone was steady, devastating in its restraint. You've been paying me rent for years, Andrew. You just didn't know it. The silence was a blade. Clara's breath caught. The investors exchanged glances, some amused, some pitying, most curious. Andrew's face turned crimson. You're lying. Daniel only smiled. Check your contracts. My name's on every page. Or rather. Hart Enterprises. Clara's purse buzzed. She glanced down and saw an email notification. She hesitated, then opened it. Her blood ran cold. It was a news alert. Hart Enterprises announces full acquisition of Crestfield Holdings. The company Andrew had staked his future on. The room erupted into whispers. Andrew swayed, glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the marble floor. Clara clutched her purse tighter, her mind racing. Daniel wasn't bluffing. He had revealed just enough to humiliate Andrew in front of the world, but not everything. Clara's pulse thundered. If Daniel owned this much, what else was he hiding? And why did she feel both fear and a dangerous, forbidden thrill knowing it? The fallout from the gala spread through the city like wildfire. Within 48 hours, Andrew's name became a whisper of pity in boardrooms and a punchline at cocktail bars. Deals vanished, calls went unanswered, and creditors circled like vultures. The empire he had bragged about was dissolving before his eyes. He sat in his office late at night, tie loosened, staring at a mountain of unpaid invoices. His reflection in the glass window looked nothing like the man he pretended to be, red-eyed, desperate, stripped of the arrogance that once filled every room he entered. Clara lingered in the doorway, hesitant. "Andrew," she whispered, "maybe you should step back. Take some time to think." His head snapped toward her. "Think? Think while heart tears everything I built apart." His voice cracked with rage, but beneath it was fear. "You think this is coincidence? He's doing this to me. He's destroying me piece by piece." Her lips trembled. The text, the gala, the headlines, she couldn't deny it anymore. Daniel wasn't just striking at Andrew's finances, he was dismantling his soul. And yet, when she thought of Daniel, her chest ached with guilt. She remembered the night he sold his car, the way his fingers brushed hers when he handed her the surgery papers. He hadn't asked for recognition, hadn't asked for repayment. He had simply said, "I need you to live." Andrew slammed his fist on the desk, snapping her back to the present. "If you know something, Clara, if you've spoken to him, tell me now." She shook her head, voice breaking. "I haven't." A silence hung between them, thick and poisonous. Andrew studied her with narrowed eyes, suspicion gnawing at him. She looked away, unable to hold his gaze. Across the city, Daniel's plan was entering its final stage. He had not forgotten the night Clara walked away, the way her words cut deeper than any blade. "I can't live like this. You have nothing to offer me." That memory replayed as he signed the last set of papers, papers that transferred Andrew's mansion, cars, and company shares into Hart Enterprises' control. The law was a weapon, and he wielded it with precision. The next morning, Andrew woke to find men in suits at his doorstep. Clara watched from the staircase as they handed him documents, their tone formal, almost cold. Andrew's voice broke. "You can't do this. This is my house." The man replied, "Not anymore. Ownership has changed hands." Clara's blood ran cold. Ownership. Daniel's name was on those papers, she was sure of it. She saw Andrew crumple onto the marble floor, his pride crushed beyond repair. That evening, as Clara walked past Andrew's discarded papers, one envelope slipped open. Curiosity burned through her guilt, and she pulled it free. Her breath caught, the letterhead read, Hart Enterprises. The signature at the bottom was Daniel's. Her hands shook. He wasn't just circling Andrew, he owned him now. And though fear gripped her, she couldn't deny the dangerous truth curling inside her chest. Part of her wanted to see just how far Daniel would go. The mansion no longer smelled of wealth and comfort. Boxes lined the hallways, furniture covered in white sheets as if mourning the empire that once lived there. Andrew sat on the edge of the staircase, unshaven, his suit wrinkled and stained. His phone lay shattered on the marble floor, another deal lost, another investor abandoning him. For the first time, he looked like the thing he had always mocked, a man with nothing. Clara moved silently through the dim house, the letter from Hart Enterprises still burned into her mind. Each time she looked at Andrew's hollowed face, a memory haunted her, the way Daniel had stood outside that hospital years ago, drenched in rain after selling his car, holding the receipt like a lifeline. He hadn't spoken much, just pressed the papers into her trembling hands. She had clung to him then, whispering gratitude. And yet, not long after, she had walked away, convinced that survival meant aligning with wealth, not loyalty. That night, headlights cut through the driveway. Andrew looked up, startled. "Who the hell is that?" The front doors opened before Clara could answer. Daniel walked in, no longer the man in faded shirts and second-hand shoes, but draped in a suit that whispered power. His stride was calm, deliberate, and behind him came two men in tailored black, carrying briefcases. Andrew leapt to his feet. "You!" His voice cracked with disbelief and fury. You're behind this. You ruined me. Daniel's eyes were cold, steady. No, Andrew. You ruined yourself. I just revealed the truth everyone was too blind to see. Clara's breath hitched. She had imagined this confrontation, but the reality was sharper than glass. Daniel's presence filled the room with a quiet authority that Andrew had never truly possessed. You sold me out. Andrew spat, pointing at Clara. You knew. You knew it was him. Clara shook her head violently. I didn't. I swear I didn't. But her voice lacked conviction. Somewhere inside, she knew she had always suspected Daniel wasn't the man Andrew mocked him to be. The way he carried himself, the discipline in his silence, those were not traits of a broken man. Daniel stepped closer, his words cutting like steel. I gave up everything once for someone I loved. Sold my last car to save her life. And she walked away the moment she could stand on her own feet. His gaze locked onto Clara, and for a fleeting moment, pain flickered beneath the ice. Do you remember, Clara? Or did comfort erase that memory? Her knees trembled. Tears blurred her vision as the truth she had buried clawed its way back. Daniel. Andrew lunged, his voice hoarse. You think this is revenge? You think you've won? You're nothing but a bitter man clinging to the past. Daniel didn't flinch. No. This isn't about the past. This is about truth. About justice. You paraded her like a prize, mocked me for being poor, when the truth was, I owned every car you bragged about driving. I owned the company you pretended to run. And now, I own you. Andrew froze, the words slamming into him like a death sentence. Clara gasped, realizing the depth of Daniel's deception and strategy. It hadn't been luck, it had been design, years in the making. Daniel turned to leave, but paused at the door. His voice dropped, colder than the night air spilling into the house. I could take everything from you, Andrew. But I've already done that. What hurts worse is this, you'll wake up tomorrow knowing the woman you chose never loved you for who you were. She loved the lie. His eyes shifted to Clara one last time. Not with longing, not with forgiveness, but with finality. And you'll wake up knowing you lost the only man who ever truly loved you. The door closed behind him. Silence swallowed the mansion. Andrew sank to the floor, broken beyond repair. Clara stood frozen, the echo of Daniel's footsteps ringing louder than her own heartbeat. She realized then, revenge wasn't loud. Revenge was precise, patient, and merciless. And Daniel Hart had mastered it. The mansion was stripped of its grandeur. Dust lingered where chandeliers once gleamed, and the silence felt heavier than any argument Clara and Andrew had ever shared. She moved slowly through the rooms, fingertips brushing over empty spaces as if touching ghosts. Every step echoed with choices she wished she could undo. At night, when sleep eluded her, memories clawed their way back uninvited, Daniel waiting outside the hospital with drenched hair, pressing his last car keys into the doctor's palm, Daniel smiling faintly when she had recovered, whispering, "That's all that matters." She had once believed that kind of love wasn't enough. Now, she wondered if it had been the only thing that ever truly mattered. Andrew was unraveling faster than she could comprehend. Once the man who boasted about connections and wealth, he now spent his days staring at eviction notices, his whiskey glass never empty. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow bitterness. He muttered Daniel's name in his sleep, as though haunted by the ghost of a man he could never defeat. One evening, Clara found him slumped over the dining table, papers scattered around him. His voice was rough when he spoke. He took everything, Clara. Everything. The company, the cars, the house. And you let him. Her lips parted, trembling. I didn't let him. I didn't know. You knew, Andrew snapped, lifting his bloodshot eyes. Deep down, you knew he was better than me. That's why you're still here. Not because you love me, but because you're waiting to see if he'll come back for you." The words sliced her open. She wanted to deny it, but her silence betrayed her. Tears welled, not for Andrew, not even for herself, but for the man she had lost, the man who once loved her enough to give up everything. Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel stood alone in his penthouse overlooking the skyline. The empire was his now. Hart Enterprises controlled everything Andrew once held dear. But victory felt strangely hollow. He poured himself a drink and stared at the glittering horizon, remembering Clara's smile, her laughter in their small apartment when money was scarce but love was abundant. He had planned every move, every strike, but nothing had prepared him for the emptiness of triumph. A flashback gripped him, the day Clara walked out. She had stood at the doorway, suitcase trembling in her hands. "I can't do this anymore, Daniel. I need more than hope. I need stability." He had begged her to stay, promised her things would change. But she had left, and in her absence, he had learned patience, strategy, and how to build an empire out of pain. Revenge had replaced love as his fuel. And now, standing in the very victory he had longed for, he realized revenge never gave warmth, it only burned colder. Clara tried, in her own way, to reach out to him. Weeks later, she wrote a letter, her words trembling across the page. "I see now what I threw away. I see the man you were, and the man you've become. And I know I can't ask for forgiveness. But if you ever wonder if I regret it, the answer is every day." She never sent it. She folded it, tucked it inside a drawer, and let her tears stain the edges. Andrew, stripped of pride, drifted into obscurity, his name forgotten where once it had been gilded. Clara lived with her regret, her nights haunted by the man who had once saved her life and then condemned her with silence. And Daniel, he remained untouchable, respected, feared, envied. Yet in his quiet moments, when the city lights blurred into shadows, he whispered to himself, not in triumph but in mourning, "I loved her once. That was my greatest mistake." The revenge was complete. The empire was his. But the heart he had once given freely remained the only thing he could never reclaim. Years later, the city barely remembered Andrew's name. His downfall had been swift, but his disappearance was quieter still. Some whispered he drank himself into an early grave, others said he vanished abroad, chasing shadows of fortunes that no longer existed. But Clara remembered. She remembered every argument, every cruel word, every moment she had chosen pride over love. She lived alone in a modest apartment now, stripped of the luxuries she once clung to. The grand gowns were gone, the jewels pawned long ago. What remained was a drawer filled with unsent letters, each one beginning with the same trembling line, "Daniel, I'm sorry." She would write them at night, her tears staining the ink, then fold them away, too ashamed to ever send them. The letters became her confessions, her silent prayers, her punishment. One stormy evening, she wandered through the city and found herself outside Hart Enterprises. The towering glass building pierced the night sky, its lights gleaming like cold stars. Daniel's empire. She stood across the street, watching as sleek cars pulled in, executives hurried out, and Daniel's shadow occasionally flickered past a window high above. He never saw her. He never looked down. Inside, Daniel sat in his office, staring at a single framed photograph on his desk, Clara, smiling in the sunlight of their old apartment, back when happiness had been simple. He never showed the photo to anyone, never spoke of her, but he kept it there, hidden beneath stacks of files, like a wound that refused to heal. His assistants whispered about him in hushed tones. He was brilliant, ruthless, unstoppable. Yet when they saw him alone, there was a weight in his eyes, a hollow victory in his silence. Daniel had won everything. And yet, in the quiet, he had nothing. The rain lashed harder that night, and Clara finally whispered aloud through the glass, "I loved you once." The words vanished in the storm, unheard, but in some cruel twist of fate, Daniel stirred in his office chair at the same moment, his hand brushing the photograph as though he had heard her ghost. Years earlier, when he had sold his last car for her surgery, he had believed love could conquer all. But time had carved new truths into him. Love, he learned, could be betrayed. Love could be abandoned. And once shattered, it could never be pieced back together without leaving cracks that bled forever. Clara turned away from the building, her reflection dissolving in the wet glass, leaving only Daniel's tower standing tall behind her. She knew she would never enter those doors, never face him again. Her punishment was eternal, to live in the shadow of the man she had lost, knowing she had been the architect of her own ruin. Daniel, alone at his desk, lifted the photograph one last time and slipped it into a locked drawer. His whisper was steady, but it carried the weight of years. That was the last time I loved. Then he turned back to his empire, the rain hammering against the windows like applause for a victory that felt more like a funeral. The city lights blurred, the storm raged on, and somewhere between regret and revenge, their story ended, not with reunion, not with forgiveness, but with silence. A silence that echoed louder than any words ever could.